we're all supposed to think that champagne is the very best possible wine. It's the only thing to drink. But in fact, on many occasions, not all champagne is as good as its reputation.
Could you maybe describe the current identity of Cava?
Cava is a really complicated thing. If you say to someone, I've just had this terrific bottle of Cava, people will be slightly astonished and embarrassed that you should be saying that. So it has this image problem, which is really serious. We have a big demand for cheap wine, and Cava fits into that cheap wine category. On the other hand, at the same time, there is another category of Cava which is exceptional. And the problem is, how can you sell exceptional wines if they have a brand name which is the cheapest of the cheap?
Hi everybody, and welcome to No Sediment Wine Podcast. Today we are in London at the headquarters of the Institute of Masters of Wine, and today my guest is a writer and Master of Wine, Sarah Jane Evans.
Hello.
Hi,
Lovely to be here in the home of, the Masters of Wine.
Oh, that's true, yes. So I am sure that majority of wine lovers don't need a lot of introduction, but still, could you maybe please tell us more about you and how your wine journey started and how you ended up in love with Spanish wine?
So my life, I think, has always been wine. I mean, as a student, people, cocktails or beer or cider. But actually, just before I went to Cambridge University, I spent some time in Spain, and it fell in my heart. And at the university in those days, they may still do it, they would give you, when you read out your essays to your tutor, a glass of sherry. And it was quite interesting for an 18-year-old to be drinking sherry. So sherry landed in my heart, and Spain landed in my heart, and wine continued. And then I worked as a journalist on England's best-selling food magazine. And then I moved into freelance journalism, and always with an interest in food and wine. I was president of the Guild of Food Writers, so I'm deeply, deeply involved in taste and flavour and communicating that. And then as my time went on, I was commissioning a very well-known wine writer to write for me. And I thought, hey, this wine business is not complicated. I could do it too. And he was Oz Clarke. He's Oz Clarke, and he used to do a lot of blind tasting on television, getting the answers right. And I thought, well, yes. Any fool could do this.
Okay.
And then I took the exams, the Wine and Spirit Education Trust exams, and I'd never liked geography, and that took me through to understanding through wine how interesting geography was. And then naturally I went on to the Master of Wine, and I remember that the person who signed my papers to apply for the MW was the writer Jancis Robinson. And she said to me, it's going to be a bit of work, Sarah Jane. I was like, I'm not afraid of work. Little did I know that actually it is quite a lot of work. So coming out of that, then I established myself as a freelance writer, as a book writer too, with a particular specialism in Spain, but also I write about Greece, I write about a number of New World countries, a whole range of things. And then also I became, which is why I'm happy to be here, chairman of the Institute of Masters of Wine. And I'm very involved in education and encouraging people generally, either to become Masters of Wine or just not to be intimidated by wine. I think communicating the pleasure of wine and not that terror of being presented with a wine list and feeling embarrassed in front of your family because you don't know what to choose. So I'm all about making wine much more approachable.
Oh, that's great. We did meet at the Cava meeting. This is where I approached you for the interview. And so I thought it would be appropriate to focus our conversation on Cava. But before we dive a bit deeper, could you maybe describe the current identity of Cava and your view?
Cava is a really complicated thing. And I've just published a book last year, which includes, it's a book on the wines of Spain, but it has a big section on sparkling wine. And that really, there I had to confront the issue. We have, and particularly in my market, the UK market, we have a big demand for cheap wine. And Cava fits into that cheap wine category. So if you want to have some cheap bubbles, then Cava is one way to go. Although it has been taken over in glamour by Prosecco. Mm-hmm. Now, those are two very different wines. Prosecco is generally the basic Prosecco much sweeter. So it is a kind of way of younger people getting into drinking wine. And Cava is made like the champagne method and is generally drier. But it's sold super cheap. Now that's been something that's established over time. And so if you say to someone, I've just had this terrific bottle of Cava, people will be slightly astonished and embarrassed that you should be saying that. So it has this image problem, which is really serious. On the other hand, at the same time, which is why we met at the conference, there is another category of Cava which is exceptional. And the problem is, how can you sell exceptional wines if they have a brand name which is the cheapest of the cheap? So it was very funny when our older daughter was married. Obviously, you needed to have sparkling wine at some point or other. And because it was my Spanish interest, it was going to be Cava. But people who go to weddings expect to have champagne. Now, cheap champagne, I think, can be nastier than cheap Cava, actually. It has to be really sour. And I knew with the amount of champagne we were going to have, that actually we had to have a champagne that was a little bit cheaper. We had these terrific bottles. They were absolutely lovely, beautifully wrapped. We got through a huge quantity because people loved it. It's just a matter of choosing the right one. But story short, it's basically one of the wines with the biggest image problem currently today.
Yeah, that's true. And I do hope that we will have time to tackle that a little bit. But before we go, so what I always find it very interesting is that Cava can be made from these indigenous grape varieties, like you have xarel-lo, Macabeo, Parellada, and then you also have these international, Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. So how has the perception of Cava made from the local varieties versus the international varieties has changed? And do you see like the path now going one way or the other?
There was a time when Spain didn't really, when it came, it lived through a dictatorship. And in the 1980s, Franco had died, and then Spain entered Europe. And at that point, it had to re-establish itself within Europe and with confidence. And I think in a number of areas, it's taken time for Spain to be as confident as the Italians or as confident as the French. And that includes charging enough money for your wine. So Spain entered very cheaply into that market. One of the things that happened when Spain entered the European Union, and actually as the doors opened after Franco's death as the dictator, is that they felt that they needed to have international varieties. If you are in a red winemaker, maybe you needed to have Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, Syrah, all of that. Even though what we all look for now is the native varieties. Similarly, the same thing happened with Cava, maybe a lack of confidence and a feeling that Pinot Noir and Chardonnay were the way to go. And it was an issue, but frankly, I don't see it as an issue now. I think what we have is producers who do use Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, and there are producers who have indeed made outstanding, I can think of one producer who makes outstanding single variety Chardonnay. Brilliant. But the issue, I think, much more is actually the whole image problem. That's the thing I'm more concerned about.
Okay, all right. But I still want to focus a bit on these grape varieties. So do you see that some of these local grape varieties are starting to shine a bit more like the others, or like something that you would see in the future that would become an iconic grape, or something that we associate with Cava more specifically?
I'm really excited by the local grape varieties. Now, I have to say, it's taken me a journey that when I passed my WSET, the Wine Spirit Education Trust exams, we were taught that Macabeo, which is also Biura and Rioja, is really a rather flabby, uninteresting, not very acidic grape variety. That xarel-lo was this thing that was very hard to pronounce, but was something that they grew in a sort of in Catalonia, and that Parellada, nobody really knew about it, but it wasn't very interesting.
Yeah.
And now we've changed to a completely different situation with a Macabeo, which I've really had to work to understand that now you can see that with the right viticulture, it can make terrific wines. That's why we're seeing this resurgence of lovely white Rioja, really wonderful. In the same way, Macabeo is something to be proud of in Cava. And then Parellada, which is something, if you go to Cava, half the producers will say this is a really terrible grape variety and has no acidity and it's extremely dull. And then there are single variety Parelladas, which are amongst the top. So it depends where you grow it. It is the place, the elevation you grow it at is important. And then xarel-lo is the great discovery. That's the one that's going to be, in a sense, a nationally important grape variety. And it has a special place in Catalonia and Penedès, and it has this really lovely acidity which makes it great for long aging. And there are people making still wines from xarel-lo too, which are opening the people's eyes to what can be done. So it's been a journey, let's say, of about 20, 30 years, and now we are resoundingly back with, interestingly, having affection and love for the local grape varieties.
Oh, that's true. In preparation for this interview, I listened to several podcasts as well, and I realized that some of the local sommeliers are really excited about Trepat as well. So what are your thoughts on Trepat? Because the pink or rosado cava can be made from several grapes as well.
So yeah, Trepat's a really exciting one. I can vividly remember standing in a vineyard with a winemaker who's really exceptional, Ricard Ruffes, who works at Scala Dei and other places. And he said to me, this is my major discovery. This is his old fine Trepat. And I was like, who would, knowing Trepat, who would use Trepat? And he said, I'll show you, which he did. And I mean, Trepat certainly, there are, I have to say, some which aren't great, but some lovely Trepat. Equally, the other variety that's fascinating to me is Sumoll, which is, I went to a vineyard at Pardas, and it is this rampant variety, quite prickly and difficult. It grows like anything, but it produces a very interesting red grape, which is particularly, I think, focused local to that area. And so you can look for people who are also working with Sumoll. So I think there's all sorts of seeds of very interesting activity happening. I know that still Chardonnay and Pinot Noir do exist with some producers. And it also has to be said that if you think about the export market, there are markets, including perhaps our own, which have grown up on Blanc de Blanc. They're Chardonnay drinkers. And so there is a market for those cavas made from Chardonnay, or dominantly Chardonnay, which might have an appeal in this market. But certainly my heart is with the football team, which is local grape varieties, local.
Many great bottle fermented sparkling wines from around the world are often compared with champagne. In your view, what are the most distinctive characteristics that set Cava apart from champagne?
It's quite ironic sitting here in a Master of Wine room, because that is the question. You get a blind tasting, and you will have on the table champagne, and you'll have Franciacorta, and you may have something from California, and you'll have Cava, for instance, and there are a few other traditional methods. Well, you could have something from Australia, New Zealand. So how do you know it's not champagne? And quite often, I would say, we're all supposed to think that champagne is the very best possible wine. It's the only thing to drink. But in fact, on many occasions, it's not. Not all champagne is as good as its reputation. And the same with, sort of top Bordeaux, or the same with top Burgundy. And I have left out English sparkling wine, because English sparkling wine is quite a significant category too. So the thing that makes Cava different, in a good way, is that it's a Mediterranean wine. In general, 90% of all the Cava comes from 4 different regions, rather unfortunately, but 90% of it or more comes from Catalonia. And it means that because it's a Mediterranean wine, grown at different elevations, actually they don't need to give it dosage if they don't want to. So it's a dry wine, and if I read Brut Nature on a label from Champagne, from kind of the north of Europe, then I'm a bit like, oh, this is going to be hard. Or, I hope they've got good fruit. Brut Nature in Cava is actually kind of the natural flavour. And if it's not Brut Nature, you need to ask questions about it. In fact, there are some wonderful Cavas with 8 grams per litre dosage, more like we're used to in Champagne, and they're very good. So it depends on the elevation. So Cava, that's the important thing to say. And I find it very hard in when I'm introducing it to people, because there's no short way to say Cava is made exactly like that sparkling wine from northern France, because I don't want to keep mentioning Champagne. Yeah. But it is, so you will notice it obviously from, that it comes from a warmer place, but you can still get this fine acidity if the viticulture is good. They are different grape varieties in principle. Now, when I started studying about Cava, 20 or more years ago, people used to talk about the fact that it had, in some way or other, a rubbery aroma. Now, I don't get this at all, and I think it's gone. I just do think that Cava producers are making some really exceptional wines, and always have been. So what's very interesting now is that the conversation is changing. We have to say that there is a mountain of Cava which is produced with a minimum of 9 months age, which doesn't have any of that developed character at all, and it's a workaday, fairly cheap sparkling wine. But then, once you get to the category which is 18 months or more, and particularly 36 months or more, you're getting wonderful developments, and there's some lovely producers who are aging wines for 10 years or more, and they're doing something really, really good out of it. But there is a big but here. And this comes back to marketing again. There's been a lot of work within Cava on trying to change the regulations. One of those regulations is to say what we want to do is to call our aged Cavas, or the ones that are over 18 months, Cava de Guarda. So Cava which has been aged and can be aged further. However, the people who were the 9 months producers, who were really dominant, the big high volume people, said, no, we need to have a name. We can't just be Cava. So then they had to be given the word Cava de Guarda, even though it's only 9 months old, it's cradle snatching. And then the 18 months and more could call itself Cava de Guarda Superior. And I'm happy that it should be called that. But I'm not happy with calling a wine that's 9 months old Cava de Guarda. It's Cava. It can't get more than that. But so what we are seeing there is that there has been, and there continues to be, a battle about how you market these wines, an internal battle, and big production voices against smaller ones. And in other areas, they're making some great progress in segmenting the market. But in telling the world that 9-month Cava is Cava de Guarda is, nobody will believe it.
Yeah, that's true. But since that fight I saw also at the Cava meeting, on the panels, when there were some producers who were talking about issues, and then there were some producers who said, we have no issues, everything is good and fine. Let's continue that path. But since you touched upon the aging requirements, and on the very beginning we talked about Prosecco versus the Cava, and I've seen that. It's so interesting that in the trade and the industry itself, sometimes Cava is compared more with Prosecco rather than other bottle fermented sparkling wines. So the question is this longer aging requirements that we've seen also now changing for Cava Riserva, I think from 15 up to 18, was it? Not that long ago. Is that going to change this perception? And do we actually need to change the perception? Really, maybe Cava should stay in that really affordable value bottle fermented sparkling wine category.
It's interesting. When I first started traveling to Spain, it was wonderful. I mean, it was this branded campaign which was held just before Christmas, of the two major brands fighting against each other, because what you were going to have for Christmas was going to be a bottle of sparkling wine, and it was all very delightful and innocent in those days, even though it might have been quite a sweet wine or something, but it was the one that you had at Christmas. But so it's taken a long time for Cava to sort itself out and plunge into the quality segmentation. And it's going to take even longer to communicate it. That's why it's really great to be talking to you now, because the more we talk about it, eventually, hopefully, the message will get across. Still, we're in this world where Cava is the poor relation. And Prosecco has made a wonderful entry into market with its glamour. It's fascinating to see how with the Italian pizzazz you can really make something special out of it. In my book, I said that I thought that actually you have to make a decision, and you either all this vast volume, and there is masses of it, of this liquid, which is 9 months minimum. Either you call it something else, or you call it Cava. But then what you have is everything that's 18 months over, which is, there are really some great stories there, and that you call something else, alternative, and probably not Cava. Cava is a historical thing. It needed a name at a particular time, and nobody really thought about the consequences. So you have, and it's complicated. I mean, I think in the UK market, a lot of traditional customers know about Rioja Reserva, Gran Reserva. They don't. None of us understand or can pronounce Crianza or Hobbit, but I mean Reserva, Gran Reserva. So it sounds good, and you can do the same thing with Cava. You have to be aware that quite a lot of consumers want a really elegant wine, but they don't necessarily want an aged wine. You know, the conversation about age, whether it's in Champagne or Franciacorta or or England, you know, isn't necessarily a good one. You have to be quite an advanced consumer to want that. But I think maybe the problem in Cava goes deeper. You know, we have this, for historical reasons, this drink that comes from 4 places which aren't related to each other. And so you can't have that nice identity which says, hello, I'm Burgundy, I come from Burgundy, and this is more or less how we behave and eat and live, and you can come and visit us. It's not like that, because it's somehow or other all over the place. And there are, as there are in Champagne, all sorts of complicated businesses about people who grow the grapes and sell the liquid to the producers. And you can get deeply involved in technical terms there, but it does mean that the sense of being in the production heart of a place is quite complicated. And I think Cava is finally realising it has to sort it out. It's got to be a bit more transparent and a bit more open. And we're getting there.
Okay, so is there actual talk now, conversation happening about the identity of Cava and the terroir specifically?
Well, there is. Now, the question about talking to people about terroir is, are they able to understand it? Or do they want to understand it? So I can talk very interestingly and in detailed ways to a masterclass of an audience with a map and soil types and so on. But if I'm a sommelier, or if I'm behind a bar, I'm not even a sommelier, if I'm behind a bar wanting to offer a good glass of wine to somebody, you know, that conversation goes out the window. But it is true that over, I don't know, hundreds of years, the people in Champagne have defined different areas, and we can talk about those. Equally in England, we can talk about Cornwall, and for English consumers, Cornwall and Surrey and Sussex do mean something. So there are various complicating factors. I think the work that Cava is doing, and it's worth looking out for, are these sub-regions which they have set out inside Catalonia, and particularly Penedès. The difficulty is that a lot of them are Catalan names, so I can't remember them all exactly to tell you about them. And I don't think I was in a bar and I said, oh, do you have one from this sub-region? The person, I won't be able to pronounce it properly, and the person on the other side won't either. Yeah. So what I can say is that there are regions, and they are clearly quite different regions. And so that, you know, that's an excitement. And they only really began that, well, it's less than 10 years ago. So it's going to be an investment. But clearly you can tell that these wines have a difference, one from another. The next problem is, of course, that it's only a voluntary process anyway. So you don't have to announce it because clearly a number of producers prefer to blend. So, but I think it's just a matter of showing that Cava can work seriously, and there are very committed producers who want to do it. But I should add, now, the next thing we should go on to is there are some really good things being done in terms of things that you can look for on a back label. And one of those is something that I can't easily find a word for in English, but it's elaborador integral, or I think in French it'd be récoltant manipulant. But it's the way to find a grower who grows the grapes and processes them and bottles them and ages them. So it's, from sort of vineyard to glass, more or less. And that's very exciting. And that is a category that's growing. And that's lovely stories of family businesses with real identity. And it's only been going for, I think, less than 10 years. But I think it's a very clear sense of quality and identity. So if I was looking as a serious sommelier to build my list, I would definitely look at those people.
Okay, yes, that is really interesting. But you talked about the zonification of the Cava vineyards within the Penedès. Mm-hmm. So what are those producers outside of Penedès now? Because what are they thinking? Do they feel left out maybe of this a little bit?
I went to research my book. I went to the most distant part of the Cava production area, which is it's north of Seville. So it's southwest Spain. It's a least likely, to me, area for making Cava. And there's this town called Almendralejo. And there's a big roundabout in the middle, which very proudly declares Ciudad de Cava, City of Cava. It's like, yeah. And they had a great man, a pioneer, who worked out that he could successfully grow these grapes and either make the traditional method sparkling there, or quite usefully, they could also be sent as liquid or made wine to the producers in Penedès. So what happened recently was the very serious drought, a number of years over in Catalonia, which meant that suddenly these few growers, because there aren't too many of them as licensed growers, were able to ship because they had a nice abundant harvest and were able to ship to Penedès and provide the grapes. Well, that's within the regulation. So that's fine if you want to have a good value sparkling wine from Spain, definitely, a Cava. But if you want to have something which speaks of the place, then this kind of cross-country blend isn't quite the thing. Blending is, the best wines in Rioja are made from blends. The same thing you can have, all kinds of parts of the world of blends, but there are occasions when you also want to be able to encourage a single place and a single expression. So there are a few Cavas available from Almendralejo. You don't normally see them much in export, though. And then what is interesting is that there's an area which is further down the Mediterranean on the coast called Requena, which is where one of the first two wine universities were. It's a heart of wine growing and winemaking. And they have also a delimited area for making Cava. And yes, it's warmer down there. Undoubtedly, the style is different, but I would recommend 3 really good producers there who make excellent Cava. So at that point, what I'd like them to do, which they are doing, is to say, we are Requena. So you can look on the label and see it doesn't come from Penedès, but actually that they are producers with great history which come from there. They really, I think, should say, we are traditional method sparkling wine from Requena and make up a name for themselves. Okay. I think that saying that you're a premium producer and that you're Cava, so kind of somehow or other doesn't match. But nevertheless, when I'm doing tastings and I'm including wine from Requena, there's some very good ones to choose from, which then brings you back to Penedès, and there you can say what is interesting is that there is one more area, which is Rioja. And so Rioja, traditionally, there have been and are still some fine Cavas from Rioja, but at the same time, not so long ago, Rioja decided to create its own category of traditional method sparkling wine from DOCA Rioja. And this is all small print. How can you, as a consumer, deal with this? So then the interesting position is to watch who in Rioja is moving to Rioja sparkling wine, and who is staying with Cava. And that's been quite an interesting thing to watch.
What have you seen now?
Well, it's, there's one company I thought should definitely have gone to Rioja, but actually it's because they have one vineyard they use, which is outside the denomination or something. So for very often, for people, it's small print. But I think what comes from Rioja is some really, really fun and fine wine. So that's something that will grow. It will never be a huge part of their production, but it is, one more thing to add to the portfolio if you're a Rioja producer.
So since you touched upon it, I've seen it now, a lot of growth of a lot of interesting and different categories of bottle fermented sparkling wines in Spain. So we have Corpinat, that's one of the first ones, I guess. Then we have classic Penedès. And then maybe you will help me to pronounce Conca del Rio Anoia.
Yeah, very good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how does, in your view, how do you see these developments influencing the perception of Cava and understanding Cava or the Spanish sparkling wine scene better?
It's really complicated for us as consumers, because I would also add that there is a quite interesting movement amongst the younger generation of making pet nat wines as well. And so using local grape varieties, because it would be a movement which is using, xarel-lo particularly, and making pet nat is, it's a very cool thing to do. So the first people to go were to get together and decide to leave was classic Penedès. And they have a 3,000 years of a history as a wine region, and they were the first to say we are going to be 100% organic, and they had a whole number of quite tight rules, and it was very well put together, and they have some exceptional producers there. But the one thing they haven't been great at, and we can look back on it in retrospect and say, is in marketing. And if you're going to have a glossy prestige gold-wrapped bottle and all of that of champagne style, then it needs to be well marketed. So classic Penedès was a sort of hidden secret. Then Conca del Rio Anoia was one producer who I think, and there are producers like this who have such prestige and such quality and such personal commitment to their place that it's very straightforward for them to step apart. So that's another one. And then you get Corpinat, which is a really terrible name, which I'm getting used to, but it's to do with heart and pinnacle and so on, and created very cleverly, a very smart brand, which was recognized by Europe. It came sort of fully formed and was particularly created by two leaders, Gramona and Recaredo, who are top sparkling wine producers in the area. And I should just interject that the problem about all of this is the word in Spanish for sparkling is espumoso. So it could mean injected with carbon dioxide, like cheap fizzy water, or it could mean 10-year aged traditional method, So they have a language problem there. So we have Corpinat, and Corpinat is the really threatening one because they left Cava. When there's two big names, two super important wines leave, then that really shakes Cava to the foundations. More have followed. So initially there were only about 10 producers, and then actually now they've got to 21. So that machine is moving. So I have friends who are making really, trophy-winning wines in Cava, and you say to them, why don't you join in Corpinat? And one of them has said to me, well, my father wants to keep an eye on the bank balance, and one of the ways we can do that is by continuing to make Cava, sort of regular, fairly cheap Cava that gives us turnover.
Yeah.
If I join Corpinat, then I have to leave all that aside and start again at 18 months. So Corpinat has been an influence for good in many ways. It's also pushed Cava to make decisions faster. But the only problem is when you get to a regular wine list anywhere in the world and they're all just putting together. I recognise it, I sympathise with the problem deeply because as living in England, committed to English sparkling wine, you go to a reception somewhere or other, and the wine waiter comes up at this party and says, champagne. And you say, oh, can I look at the bottle? And it's English sparkling wine. So it's getting English sparkling wine taken seriously when it is something really seriously. The same thing, putting Corpinat and Conca del Rio and Oya. Most sommeliers haven't got time or space to do that. And in terms of talking to customers, what they want to do is talk about the brand. So I think we are in a very complicated position. But what we have from Cava have got is at last some activity because they've had to do it. So we have a separate group of these, let me say vineyard to glass producers, Labradores, Integrales. We have also a separate group, which is people who have single vineyard wines. Again, that's been far too complicated to communicate to consumers because you just want to tell them it exists without going through as we have. I think we've been through every planning stage and lots of masters of wine involved to consult this and things. And then we have the more recent announcement that everything over 18 months is going to be organic, which is great, is another stage. So it's putting all that mosaic together. And, I think I could feel that we are closer to having the mosaic put together. The problem is, will they ever talk to each other? And I think there's a willingness at the top of Cava to do that at the moment, but I can see that the big companies, you will have observed at the Cava conference we were at, the big companies, their business is making a lot of Cava. And the sad thing is that Cava has just been sold so cheaply. And it's not the only wine in Spain that is sold cheaply. There's far too much cheap red wine washing around. And, the big structural problem is how to get Spain out of that bulk wine issue.
Oh, yeah, that's absolutely true. But what I find really interesting, we keep talking about that Cava has this, kind of image issue. But then you briefly mentioned that. But then when you sit down at the restaurant and you open a wine list, all these, famous Corpinat producers, they will be oftentimes listed under the Cava because I think it's because it is more recognized or like, where do you see, why is that?
Yeah, no, exactly. Because I think it's, and that's going to be education. Okay. But I could see, I went to the tasting when I was at Barcelona Wine Week recently. Corpinat had a pre-Barcelona Wine Week tasting, and the wines are terrific, and the energy of the people turning up to taste those wines and to taste the new vintages is, there's a real buzz. There's a real sense of something happening there, and that's what you want to have with Cava. But it's say the word Cava, but if you said to me, top wines from Penedès, family producers, and some of these, there are producers in Cava who go back to 100. They've been making wines for hundreds of years that are really exceptional stories. So I think Cava is getting better at understanding that it needs to communicate about itself. It's out there fighting in an international marketplace, and what it has is masses of history and now some very interesting local grape varieties, and that there's lots that it can do. But the messaging is diverse. As I said, it's a mosaic, and trying to bring that back into straightforward messaging is difficult.
So the very last question that I usually ask everyone is, what is the one wine myth you would like to debunk?
Well, the wine myth for me is, you've clearly we've been talking about sparkling wine. There's this one about putting a teaspoon on the top of an open bottle to protect the bubbles. We don't have to do that one again so many times. And I've done the test with, having bottles lined up in the fridge with teaspoons and things. But in fact, it's not so much a myth as trying to brush away the elitism about wine. And coming especially from an English person, the UK is getting warmer. We're not, climate change is making, it's warmer around than we're used to it being. And you go into a pub or a bar and they serve you warm wine, just because they've always had it on the shelf, and that's how they do it. And there is no need to believe that the wine that they serve you is somehow or other the best temperature. It's the temperature that you need. So I have no shame about putting in ice cubes, asking for ice cubes and putting them into a glass of wine. I think you should be in control of your glass, and ice cubes is the way. Now, I admit, I'm not going to go into most bars or pubs to drink, Grand Cru this or Chateau that. So I'm talking about more mainstream wines, but particularly, there's an awful lot of red wine, especially with quite high alcohol, might come from Argentina or something like that. Ice cube makes all the difference.
Oh, that's so good. And we do have, I think, issue with that. Usually people sneer when you do that.
Well, so what you have to do, I mean, it and it depends who I'm with, but you have to pretend that the ice cube is for somebody else, for some other drink, and you just ask for the ice cubes. And then when they're not looking, you just...
Okay. All right. Next, we will have a short this or that, like a lightning round.
Right.
You just don't have to answer in full sentences, just one or the other. So, Macabeo or xarel-lo?
xarel-lo.
Blend or single variety expression?
Blend.
Brut nature or brut?
Brut nature.
Aperitif cava or gastronomic cava?
Gastronomic cava.
Manzanilla or amontillado?
Amontillado.
Oh, fortified Jerez or unfortified?
Both. Okay. Has to be both.
Rioja or Ribera del Duero?
Rioja.
High altitude Garnacha or volcanic origin Listan Bianco?
They're too difficult at high altitude. Maybe the Listan Blanco. Yes.
Blanco, okay. Trusted benchmark producer or bold new talent?
Bold new talent. I'm a journalist. That's what I'm looking for.
Okay. Sparkling start or sweet finish?
Sparkling start or sweet finish. Both, surely.
Both?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
I do try when I'm got friends around to have, because I have the benefit of having samples and so on, to have quite a lot of different wines on the table. People who drink red wine don't like white wine and so on. Sweeter who drink like big tannic wines. Others prefer kind of more wimpy styles, as I do. And then people who say, I never drink sweet wine. And then you say, well, try drinking it with this food. And then, so yes, I like to mix it up as much as possible.
Okay, that's good. And the last question, very last question, I promise, comes from the previous guest, which in this case was Tim Wildman, also Master of Wine. And he asked, thinking about AI, so artificial intelligence, who are going to be the winners and who are going to be the losers in the wine industry?
Yeah, that's a question which we haven't really come to terms with, and we ought to post it into AI and find out what the answer is, because there's much conversation about that. I'm clear. I'm a founder member of the Academy of Chocolate, and we have awards every year, and so this is parallel to wine. We have awards every year, and we get 7 judges to review each chocolate and to write a note, and then AI puts them all together. But we do originate, because it was the editing process of putting together 7 tasting notes and so on. Suddenly you feed it into the machine and it's done. So it comes from a creative beginning. And I could see again and again, especially predictive text is telling me, I'm fighting against the predictive text, which is telling me what my next word is trying to be. So I'm trying to look for another word. I can see that it will save us time. But I also think that your critical faculties need to be absolutely, we are going to have to work harder and harder at being critical about what AI generates for us. So one of the things that you do in the Master of Wine exam is you get marked not only on your content and the way you communicate, but also on your samples of critical analysis and critical thinking in your essays. And that's going to be something we're really going to have to work at, teaching next generations and ourselves to be, I always believe what I say in print, no, you can't do it any longer. So it is going to save us a lot of time. I can see that it's going to save a lot of time, but at every stage we're going to need to check.
Yeah. So do you have a question for the next guest?
You don't know who the next guest is?
I don't know. I can tell you. It's going to be Christopher Burr.
Well, that's
also
because I had a question which actually then would be quite relevant to him. It's important to ask it as an open question, but the question is, what is the future for Bordeaux en primeur? So my question really is, well, I would ask a closed question, which is the Bordeaux en primeur dead? But I think he would say yes or no. So I think you have to put it the other way, which is, what is the future? And then he can explore it in two directions.
That's such an interesting and very current topic.
Yeah.